He's known to the church by a single label, Doubting Thomas. But labels flatten people. They turn a life into a single moment and forget everything that led to it. What if that moment, his demand for proof, was not the end of his story, but the hinge of a much larger life? What really happened on the journey of Thomas, the one called Didymus? Begin with the man's name. Thomas means twin in Aramaic. Didymus means the same in Greek. Twice named, twice marked. Some ancient readers heard in that doubling a hint. Here is someone with layers, someone who might hold two things at once: courage and caution, zeal and carefulness, loyalty and skepticism. The canonical Gospels give us a handful of glimpses. Taken together, they sketch a disciple not reducible to a single outburst. One early revealing line comes during the crisis that would define the 12. Jesus is facing mortal danger, and Lazarus has died. The disciples are afraid, pressed into a corner of loyalty and survival. It is then that Thomas speaks with a bluntness that has been too often misread as mere stubbornness. John records his words, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That sentence, simple, startling, recasts Thomas instantly. Here is a man willing to follow to the end, a man ready to face death rather than abandon his rabbi. Courage, not cowardice, commitment, not casual curiosity. Keep that image in mind as the story turns darker. The next scenes are the crucifixion and its aftermath, shouting crowds, the shock of betrayal, the disciples scattered like frightened birds. They had witnessed the violent end of their hope. Trauma in the raw. It changes people, it fractures memory and expectation. The resurrection news spreads like a rumor at first. Mary and the others speak of an empty tomb, strange appearances. Stories reach the remaining disciples in fitful bursts. For a man like Thomas, someone who had spoken of following to death, the resurrection, reported secondhand, could feel hollow or hazardous. The wound of loss was still fresh, the need for certainty urgent. So when John tells us that Thomas was not present at the first appearance of the risen Jesus to the disciples, and when he replies, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will not believe," it is tempting to read that as obstinacy, but read it against the grain of his character and his recent suffering. It is instead an insistence that faith be anchored in encounter, not rumor. Thomas refuses the convenience of secondhand faith. He demands a meeting with reality. He asks to touch what is true because he knows how quickly hope can be shattered. 8 days later, the scene that crowns the Gospel's narrative takes place. The community is gathered, the doors are shut. Jesus appears. He turns to Thomas and offers exactly what the disciple requested. "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side." Those words are among the most tender and the most daring in the Gospel. Jesus accommodates the need of a wounded friend, not to shame him, but to heal him into belief. Thomas's response is immediate and total, "My Lord and my God." There is a rhetorical curvature here worth noticing. The man who once said, "Let us go that we may die with him," now confesses the risen Christ as Lord and God, an astonishing turn from the brink of despair to a confession of cosmic scope. Jesus answers Thomas and, in doing so, speaks to every later believer. "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." The line is not a dismissal of Thomas. It honors him and then reaches beyond him, teaching a generation that will not have physical proofs. Yet the story's drama insists that Thomas's demand was not hostility toward faith, but a human test of faith's foundations. From that intimate encounter, the canonical record grows sparse. The Gospels end. Acts gives no further biography of Thomas. The rest of Thomas's life is traced in fragmentary ways, hints in tradition, echoes in early Christian writings, the memory of communities that claim a lineage to his witness. These are not the same kind of evidence as the Gospel narratives. They are, precisely, traditions, rich, local, variegated, sometimes contradictory. The task is to keep them distinct from the canonical accounts while listening to what they tell us about how Thomas was remembered and why his story mattered. according to early Christian accounts that circulated outside the canonical text. Among them, the 3rd century Acts of Thomas. Thomas becomes a missionary who moves eastward. Some traditions deposit him first in Parthia, some in Persia. Many give him a longer legacy in the land we now know as India. The Acts of Thomas is not scripture. It is a theological narrative, full of symbolic episodes, miracles, and dialogues that reflect how early Christians imagined apostolic mission. But as tradition, it left an imprint. Communities in southwestern India, particularly in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu, around present-day Chennai, trace an ancient identity to the witness of Thomas. In the accounts that took hold in India, Thomas arrives on the southwestern coast, preaching the gospel, forming congregations, and engaging with local social and religious life. Local stories describe him encountering Brahmin priests, debating with learned men, and winning converts who would become roots of the Mar Thoma and Syrian Christian communities. Again, these are traditions. Historical certainties are not neat or complete. Some scholars point to possible trade links between the Roman Indian world that make such journeys plausible. Others urge caution. Accounts vary, and where the record ends in stories, historians say probability and faith must be kept in careful conversation rather than collapsed into certainty. There are vivid motifs that recur. One is the image of wounds and spears. Many traditions assert that Thomas died a martyr's death, speared during a confrontation that turned violent. In South India, St. Thomas Mount near Chennai is venerated as the place where his martyrdom occurred. A tomb attributed to Thomas has become a pilgrimage site. There, the wounds become a symbol of both suffering and sanctity. Whether every detail is strictly historical is debated. Some elements appear in later storytelling and devotional imagination. But the power of the motif is real. A disciple who once asked to touch the wounds of Christ ends his life associated with a wound, a paradox that binds testimony to sacrifice. Alongside the Acts of Thomas stands the Gospel of Thomas, a very different kind of text. Discovered among the Nag Hammadi codices, it is a collection of sayings attributed to Jesus. Some of those sayings resemble canonical material, others are enigmatic, even Gnostic in tone. Scholars date it early, 2nd century or earlier, but it stands outside the canon. It does not narrate the life of Thomas so much as preserve a memory of him as an interpreter of Jesus' words. The Gospel of Thomas thus became part of how some early communities imagined apostolic authority, a teacher who carried sayings, secret or otherwise, that shaped local belief. Again, we must be clear. It is a window into reception history, not a replacement for the Gospels. It shows how Thomas's name carried weight beyond the narrow lens of doubt. Communities claimed him as a transmitter of wisdom. How then do we put these pieces together, without collapsing nuance? First, the canonical witness makes Thomas more than a caricature. He is courageous, faithful in his own way, honest in a world that demands ready-made answers. Second, the post-canonical traditions offer a plausible trajectory. A man transformed by an encounter becomes a missionary, crossing cultural and linguistic boundaries, engaging new contexts, and planting communities whose roots persist to this day. Third, where traditions diverge or become rich with miracle narratives, we should treat them as the faith-remembering of communities, powerful, meaningful, but not on the same epistemic footing as the gospel accounts. Consider more deeply why Thomas matters for believers who live far from his Mediterranean and Indian settings. There is a moral arc in his story that speaks across centuries. Doubt can be the start of a deeper faith. Thomas did not reject faith out of laziness or malice. He demanded the evidence of encounter. For many of us, doubt is not a final verdict, but an honest posture. It asks, it aches, it fears, and it seeks. Thomas is a model for honest seekers. Say what you feel, ask for the encounter you need, and be open to transformation when the encounter comes. There is also a missional dimension. The tradition that Thomas crossed the sea and entered cultures very different from his own conveys a powerful conviction that the gospel is not geographical. It is meant to move, to cross languages, to be embodied in new social forms. The model of mission associated with Thomas is not triumphalist conquest. It is relational presence, preaching, disputation, healing in some accounts, community formation. Those who claim descent from Thomas's mission, Syrian Christians in Kerala, the small but vital communities around Chennai, and the global Mar Thoma identity, testify to the endurance of apostolic memory. Whether every conversion in those stories has historical documentation or not, the presence of ancient Christian communities in India is a fact of ecclesial history. It raises questions about how Christianity traveled in late antiquity. Maritime trade routes, diasporic Jewish communities, and networks of merchants may have been the channels by which a variety of Christian voices, including those connected to Thomas, reached the subcontinent. The controversies around Thomas's story also teach humility. The Acts of Thomas tells tales of kings converted, miracles performed, opponents vanquished by spiritual insight, images that give devotional communities resources for identity formation. Yet historians warn, miracle stories, royal conversions, and tidy narratives of founding are often products of later storytelling shaped by local needs. When we say according to tradition or early accounts claim, we are not dismissing these stories. We are placing them in the right category, meaningful memories shaped by time, useful for understanding identity and devotion, but not automatically equivalent to the documentary precision of contemporaneous historical records. That tension between memory and history is part of the controversy itself. For some, to accept the Acts of Thomas as historical fact is to close interpretive questions prematurely. For others, to reject it is to cut off a spiritual inheritance that has sustained entire communities for centuries. A balanced posture recognizes both claims. The canonical Gospels give us a portrait of Thomas the disciple. The apocryphal and patrimonial writings show us how communities used that portrait to make sense of their own beginnings. Scholarship can clarify probabilities, but it cannot and should not fully extinguish the devotional reality that fuels pilgrimage and identity. How should modern believers approach Thomas? Let his arc move us. First, practice intellectual honesty. Name your doubts. Thomas did not cover his uncertainty. He spoke it aloud. That honesty made room for an encounter. Second, seek encounter. The Gospel's drama is not that Thomas doubted, but that he met the risen Lord and was transformed. Christians are reminded to pursue encounters with Scripture, in prayer, through community, in acts of service that do not substitute hearsay for embodied experience. Third, embrace mission that is respectful. The traditions about Thomas's ministry in India call the Church to a kind of witness that crosses cultures with humility, listening before claiming, learning before imposing. There is a final image that binds the beginning and end of his path. The man who once said, "Let us also go, that we may die with him," who demanded to see and touch, is remembered in a place where his life is associated with a wound from a spear. The wound image is paradoxical and poignant. A disciple who touched the wounds of Christ is himself commemorated in the memory of a wound. It suggests that discipleship is costly. Witness invites suffering. Faith may involve both encounter and sacrifice, but it also suggests continuity. Thomas's life is not an aberration, but part of a larger pattern in discipleship: doubt, encounter, conviction, and costly mission. If nothing else, the controversy around Thomas challenges tidy categories. He is not merely a doubter, nor merely a saint. He is a representative human, wanting proof, then transformed by it, confronting fear and then crossing seas, demanding truth and offering life. His journey, as recorded in Scripture and preserved in tradition, invites honest reflection about how faith is formed. For those who stand where rumor fails them and experience is scarce, Thomas's request is instructive. For those who have been given evidence, an answered prayer, a meaningful encounter, his confession is a model: "My Lord and my God." For communities tracing their roots to him, Thomas is a founding figure whose memory shaped identity, worship, and mission across centuries and continents. What practical steps might this inspire in you? If your faith feels fragile, speak honestly with someone you trust about what you doubt. Name it. Seek experiences that might test and deepen belief. Study, community, service, pilgrimage, even if those experiences do not come as dramatic revelations. If you're in a community that carries traditions claiming apostolic origins, honor the devotion that produced those stories while keeping a healthy curiosity about their historical contours. And if you feel called to mission, remember the way Thomas's story, canonical and traditional, pairs encounter with humility, cross cultures with respect, listen first, live faithfully, and accept sacrifice as a cost of fidelity rather than a trophy to display. One more caution. When we repeat the tales that surround Thomas, do so with care. Say, according to tradition, or early accounts claim, when you turn to apocryphal material. Treat the gospel narratives as the canonical anchor, and the Acts and the Gospel of Thomas as valuable windows into memory and reception, not as replacements for the canonical testimony. Accounts vary about many details of Thomas's later life and death. Historical consensus is not always attainable. That ambiguity is not a defect, but a feature of memory and history. It invites not certitude, but faithfulness. It asks us to live in the tension of what is known and what is remembered with reverence. Thomas's life offers a final piercing challenge. Where are you on your journey? Is doubt a wall you cannot cross, or a threshold into seeking? Will you name what you do not know and place yourself in the path of possible encounter? Thomas demanded to see. He was given a presence, and in that presence his speech became worship. His path led him far from the site of Jerusalem. It may lead you around the corner of your present life. In either case, his story insists that faith, for all its mystery, often begins with honesty and ends in encounter. If this changes how you see Thomas, leave a comment below or save this video for a later read. If you want more stories like this, deep dives that take scripture seriously and traditions respectfully, subscribe and check the description for sources and further reading. May the one who meets seekers and answers honest questions guide your journey and bless your searching heart. May God bless you. Be at peace, my beloved family in Christ.